The alarm clock screamed at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before it was supposed to. Clara's hand shot out from under the thin comforter, slapping the snooze button with practiced precision. For a moment she lay still in the darkness of her studio apartment, listening to the early morning sounds of Brooklyn filtering through the single-pane window. A garbage truck grinding its way down the street, someone's car alarm chirping to life, the distant rumble of the subway beneath the city's skin. She didn't want to open her eyes. Not yet. Because opening her eyes meant facing the mirror, and facing the mirror meant confronting what she already knew was there. With a deep breath that did nothing to steady her nerves, Clara pushed herself upright. The September morning carried a chill that made her shiver as her feet touched the cold hardwood floor. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the familiar soreness in her ribs, the tender spot on her left shoulder where she'd been grabbed too hard. Again, the bathroom was barely large enough to turn around in, a relic of old New York construction where every inch of space was monetized. The fluorescent light above the mirror flickered twice before staying on, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. Clara gripped the edge of the sink and finally looked up. The black eye stared back at her like an accusation. It had bloomed overnight into a spectacular palette of purple and blue, the bruising spreading from the corner of her left eye down to her cheekbone. Her eye itself was slightly swollen, the lid puffy and tender to the touch. She probed it gently with her fingertips and winced. "Damn it, Derek," she whispered to her reflection. But even as she said it, she could hear his voice in her head, the way he'd turned it around on her last night. "If you hadn't talked back to me, if you'd just listened, you know I hate when you make me feel small in front of my friends. This is your fault, Clara, you pushed me to this." And the worst part? Some broken piece of her almost believed him. She opened the medicine cabinet, the hinges squeaking in protest, and pulled out her arsenal. Concealer, 3 shades lighter than her natural skin tone, color-correcting primer in green to neutralize the purple, foundation, applied with a damp beauty sponge in careful patting motions, powder to set it all, more concealer, more powder. By the time she finished, 25 minutes had passed, and her face looked almost normal. Almost. If you didn't look too closely. If you didn't know what to look for. Clara had become an expert at this particular artistry over the past 8 months. The first time had been a split lip, easy enough to explain away as biting it in her sleep. Then a bruise on her arm, hidden by long sleeves even though it was summer. A handprint on her throat, covered by scarves and high collars. Each time Derek promised it would never happen again. Each time she believed him a little less but stayed anyway. Because where would she go? She'd moved to New York for him, left behind her small hometown in Pennsylvania, alienated her family who'd warned her about moving in with a man she'd only known for 6 months. Pride kept her from calling them, admitting they'd been right. Pride and shame, twisted together until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She dressed quickly in her work uniform, black pants that had seen better days, a white button-down shirt she'd ironed last night, non-slip shoes that made her feet ache but kept her from falling on the greasy diner floor. She pulled her dark hair back into a tight ponytail, making sure no strands would fall forward and disturb her carefully constructed mask. The subway ride to work was a blur of tired faces and compressed humanity. Clara kept her head down, earbuds in but no music playing, just another prop to keep people from talking to her. She got off at the Carroll Street station and walked the 3 blocks to Rosie's Diner, a relic of 1950s Americana that had somehow survived gentrification, rent hikes, and the relentless march of Starbucks franchises. The diner's neon sign, half the letters burned out so it read R size in R, buzzed and flickered in the gray morning light. Rain clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising a miserable day. Clara could smell it in the air, that particular petrichor scent that came before a storm. "Morning, honey," Maria called from behind the counter as Clara pushed through the door. Maria Torres had worked at Rosie's for 15 years and her warm brown eyes missed nothing. She was in her mid-40s with streaks of silver in her black hair that she refused to dye, saying they were badges of honor from raising 3 kids on a waitress's salary. "Morning," Clara replied, forcing brightness into her voice as she stashed her bag in the back and tied on her apron. Maria was pouring coffee for early morning regulars, construction workers grabbing breakfast before their shifts, a few insomniacs nursing hangovers, old Mr. Chen who came in every morning at 6:30 and ordered the same thing, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, black coffee. "You okay, sweetheart?" Maria asked quietly, stepping close as Clara prepared to take over her section. "Fine, just tired." The lie came easily now, worn smooth by repetition. Maria's eyes lingered on Clara's face, and for a moment, Clara was terrified the makeup hadn't held, that the bruise was visible. But Maria just squeezed her shoulder gently, making Clara flinch despite herself, and nodded. "You know where I am if you need to talk." "I know. Thanks, Maria." The morning shift passed in the usual blur of orders and refills. Clara moved through it mechanically, her body remembering the rhythms even while her mind drifted. She smiled at customers, laughed at bad jokes, wrote down orders on her little green pad, called them back to the kitchen where Louise cooked with efficiency born of decades at the grill. Around 11, the rain started, fat droplets at first, then a steady downpour that sent people scurrying inside, shaking water from their coats and umbrellas. The diner filled up with the lunch crowd, a blessed distraction. Clara was too busy to think about Derek, about the text messages that kept buzzing in her pocket. She'd stopped reading them hours ago, about the fact that she had to go home to him tonight. By 3 in the afternoon, the lunch rush had ended, and the diner settled into that quiet lull between meals. Only a handful of customers remained, a college student typing away on a laptop, an elderly couple sharing a slice of apple pie, 2 off-duty cops Clara recognized as regulars. That's when the black Mercedes pulled up outside. Clara noticed it through the window while refilling Mr. Chen's coffee. It was impossible not to notice. A sleek, expensive machine that looked utterly out of place on this working-class Brooklyn street. The car idled for a moment, rain streaming down its polished surface before the engine cut off. Maria noticed it too. Clara saw her friend's expression change, saw the way her body tensed slightly as she watched the car. The college student looked up from his laptop. The off-duty cops exchanged glances. The driver's door opened first. A large man emerged, built like a linebacker, wearing a dark suit that strained slightly across his shoulders. He opened an umbrella and moved to the rear passenger door. Then a second man stepped out. He was tall, Clara could tell even from a distance, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never having to prove anything. Dark suit, perfectly tailored. Salt and pepper hair swept back from a strong face. Even through the rain-streaked window, Clara could see the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the street with calculated precision before he turned toward the diner. "Jesus, Mary and Joseph," Maria muttered, crossing herself quickly. "What? Who is that?" Clara asked. Maria pulled her aside, speaking low and urgent. "That's Vittorio Moretti. You don't know that name?" Clara shook her head. "He's—" Maria paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's connected, honey. Mafia. Runs things in this part of Brooklyn. Owns half the businesses on this street, probably including this diner, though Rosie would never admit it. You don't want his attention. Be polite, take his order, don't make eye contact more than necessary, and for the love of God, don't ask questions." Clara's heart began to pound. In the 8 months she'd lived in Brooklyn, she'd heard rumors, whispers about organized crime still operating in certain neighborhoods, but it had always seemed distant, almost mythological, not something that walked through the door on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The door opened, and Vittorio Moretti entered, followed by his bodyguard and another man in a similar suit. Water dripped from the umbrella onto the worn linoleum floor. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The college student hastily packed up his laptop. The elderly couple suddenly remembered they had somewhere to be. Even the 2 cops seemed to find reason to leave, dropping bills on the counter and nodding respectfully as they passed Vittorio on their way out. Within 2 minutes, the diner was empty except for Mr. Chen, who was either oblivious or didn't care, Maria, Clara, Luis in the kitchen, and the 3 men who'd just arrived. Vittorio's eyes swept the room with the practiced assessment of someone always calculating threats and advantages. He moved to a booth in Clara's section, the corner one with a view of both the door and the street. His associates took positions that Clara recognized from movies, one near the door, one with a clear line of sight to the kitchen. This was her section, her table. She had to serve him. Clara grabbed a menu and a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly as she approached the booth. She kept her head slightly angled, a habit now, the way she'd learned to minimize the visibility of the bruise. "Good afternoon," she said, setting the water down. "Can I get you something to drink while you look at the menu?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was a small victory. Vittorio didn't look at the menu. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, brown so deep they were almost black, and they held an intensity that made Clara feel like she was being X-rayed, not in a lewd way, but in a way that suggested he could see past all her carefully constructed defenses. "Espresso, if you have it." If not, black coffee. His voice was deep, carrying a trace of an accent that suggested Italian roots, though his English was perfect. And the chicken parmigiana. Of course. That'll be right up. Clara scribbled the order, conscious of those eyes still on her face. She turned to leave. Miss. She froze, turned back. Yes? What's your name? This felt dangerous somehow, but not answering felt more dangerous. Clara. Clara. He said it slowly, as if testing the weight of it. You work here long? About 7 months. He nodded, then seemed to dismiss her with a slight gesture. Clara retreated to the counter, her heart hammering. She put the order in, made the espresso. Thankfully, Rosie had insisted on keeping the old Italian espresso machine, even though barely anyone ordered from it. You okay? Maria whispered, appearing at her elbow. Why is he asking questions? Did I do something wrong? No, honey, that's just his way. He's observant. It's how he stays alive in his business. Clara delivered the espresso, her hands steadier now. Vittorio was on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian. The language sounded musical and harsh at the same time. He paused his conversation long enough to nod his thanks. 15 minutes later, Luis rang the bell. The chicken parmigiana was ready. Clara picked up the plate, grabbed silverware wrapped in a napkin, and headed back to the booth. She was setting the plate down when it happened. A strand of hair, loosened from her ponytail by hours of work and the humidity from the rain, fell forward across her face. Without thinking, Clara brushed it back behind her ear, tilting her head slightly as she did. In that moment, the carefully applied makeup shifted just enough. The light from the window caught her face at a different angle, and Vittorio Moretti saw it. Clara didn't realize it at first. She was asking if he needed anything else, about to turn away when she noticed he'd gone completely still. Not just still, frozen. His hand, which had been reaching for his fork, stopped mid-motion. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but it was his eyes that made her stomach drop. They had locked onto the left side of her face with laser focus. Clara instinctively turned slightly, trying to hide it again, but it was too late. Who did this to you? His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet, but carried enough authority that it stopped her in her tracks. I'm sorry? Clara's hand went automatically to her face, touching the spot she'd spent half an hour covering that morning. Your eye. The bruising. He gestured vaguely toward her face. Who did this? The words hung in the air between them. Clara was acutely aware that the two other men had stopped what they were doing and were now watching this interaction. Maria was staring from behind the counter. Even Luis had poked his head out from the kitchen. It was an accident. I walked into a cabinet door. Stupid, really. I'm fine. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, but it was the same lie she'd told herself, told Maria, told the nosy neighbor who'd asked. Vittorio's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He leaned back slightly in the booth, studying her with that unnerving intensity. A cabinet door, he repeated, his tone making it clear he didn't believe a word of it. Yes, really. It looks worse than it is. The makeup usually covers it better, but the humidity... She was babbling now, words spilling out to fill the terrible silence. He continued to stare at her for a long moment. Then, very deliberately, he looked down at his food and picked up his fork. That will be all, thank you. It was a dismissal. Clara retreated gratefully, her legs feeling shaky as she made it back behind the counter. She could feel his eyes on her back, tracking her movement across the diner. What was that about? Maria hissed. I don't know. Nothing. He just noticed. Clara's hand was trembling as she poured herself a glass of water and drank it too quickly. For the next 20 minutes, Vittorio ate in silence. Clara stayed behind the counter, letting Maria handle the few customers who drifted in. She tried not to look at him, but found her eyes drawn back to that corner booth again and again. He ate slowly, methodically, but she got the sense he wasn't really tasting the food. He was thinking, calculating. Once she saw him pull out his phone and type something, then make a brief call. She couldn't hear the words, but the tone was sharp, commanding. Finally, he signaled for the check. Clara brought it over, setting it on the edge of the table without making eye contact. Thank you, Clara. He said her name again, and something about the way he spoke it made her shiver. Not from fear, or not just from fear, from something else she couldn't name. He left $200 bills on the table for a $30 meal. Before Clara could say anything about change, he stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. His bodyguards moved into formation, one opening the door, the other holding the umbrella ready. Vittorio paused at the threshold, turning back. His eyes found Clara's across the diner. For a moment, nothing else existed but that gaze. Dark, intense, seeing far too much. Then he was gone, the Mercedes pulling away from the curb and disappearing into the rain-soaked afternoon. Clara stood frozen for a long moment before Maria rushed over. Honey, that was... I've never seen him act like that. In all the times he's come in here, he's never paid attention to anyone. What did he say to you? Clara's hand went to her face again, touching the bruise through the makeup. He asked who did this. And what did you tell him? That it was an accident. Maria gripped her arms, making Clara meet her eyes. Did he believe you? Clara thought about those dark eyes, about the way they'd seen through every lie she'd told herself for months. No, I don't think he did. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Clara pulled it out, her stomach sinking as she saw Derek's name on the screen. 3 missed calls. 7 text messages. The most recent read, "Where are you? Why aren't you answering? I'm sorry about last night, baby. I'll make it up to you. I'm coming by the diner after your shift. We need to talk." Clara's hands started shaking again. She looked out the window at the rain, at the gray Brooklyn afternoon, at the ordinary people living their ordinary lives, and she felt the walls closing in, the trap tightening. She thought about Vittorio Moretti's eyes, about the quiet authority in his voice when he'd asked his question, about the way even cops gave him respectful space, about the fact that he'd seen what everyone else pretended not to see. "Maria," Clara said quietly, "I think I'm in trouble." "What kind of trouble, honey?" Before Clara could answer, her phone buzzed again. Another text from Derek. "I see you read my messages. Don't ignore me, Clara. You know I don't like being ignored." She looked at Maria, and for the first time in months, she let the fear show on her face. Let someone see the truth she'd been hiding under layers of makeup and lies. "The worst kind," she whispered. The rain hadn't let up by the time Clara's shift ended at 7. If anything, it had intensified, turning the Brooklyn streets into rivers of gray water that rushed along the gutters, carrying urban debris toward the storm drains. Clara stood just inside the diner's entrance, staring out at the deluge, her worn jacket clutched in her hands. "You want me to call you a car?" Maria asked, wiping down the counter for the 3rd time. She'd been hovering near Clara for the past hour, that worried mother-hen expression fixed on her face. "No, I can't afford it. The subway's fine. In this weather? Honey, you'll be soaked before you get to the station." Clara managed a weak smile. "I've survived worse." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Maria reached out and squeezed Clara's hand. "You call me if you need anything. Anything at all. I don't care what time it is." "I will. Thank you, Maria." But they both knew she wouldn't. Clara had been dealing with Derek on her own for too long to suddenly start asking for help now. Pride, shame, fear. They'd become such constant companions that she couldn't imagine navigating life without them. She pushed through the door into the rain, gasping as the cold water immediately soaked through her thin jacket. The walk to her apartment building normally took 15 minutes. Tonight, fighting against the wind and rain, it took nearly half an hour. By the time she reached her block, Clara was shivering, her teeth chattering, water squelching in her shoes with every step. That's when she saw him. Derek was leaning against the building's entrance, partially sheltered by the small overhang. He'd been waiting. Of course he'd been waiting. He always knew her schedule, always tracked her movements with the careful attention of someone who needed to maintain control. He looked rough. His hair was disheveled, his eyes slightly bloodshot. He'd been drinking. She could tell from the way he held himself, that particular looseness that came after a few too many beers. In his hands was a bouquet of flowers, the cellophane already wet and wilting. "There's my girl," he said, pushing off from the wall. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did anymore. "Derek, I'm exhausted. Can we talk tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? I've been waiting out here for an hour, Clara, in the rain, because I wanted to apologize properly." He thrust the flowers toward her. "I brought these for you. Your favorites." They weren't her favorites. They were white roses, Derek's favorites. But Clara had learned long ago that correcting him only made things worse. "Thank you. They're lovely. But I really need to get inside and I'll come up with you." It wasn't a question. Derek's hand found the small of her back, guiding her toward the door with just a little too much pressure. "We need to talk about last night. Clear the air." Clara's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up building that had seen better days, probably sometime in the 1970s. The stairwell smelled like mildew and old cooking oil. Derek's hand remained on her back the entire climb, a constant presence that felt less like affection and more like ownership. Her studio apartment was small enough that you could see the entire space from the doorway. The kitchenette with its 2 burners and mini fridge, the Murphy bed she'd pulled down that morning, the single window that looked out onto an air shaft, the bathroom barely visible behind a partially open door. "Nice flowers," Derek said, closing the door behind them. "Aren't you going to put them in water?" Clara set her bag down and shrugged off her wet jacket. "Derek, what do you want? If you came to apologize..." "I did apologize multiple times via text. You ignored me. I was working. You're always working." His voice had taken on that edge she recognized, the one that meant the conversation was about to turn. "Or you're avoiding me. Which is it, Clara?" She moved to the kitchenette, filling a glass with water for the flowers, trying to put some distance between them. "I'm not avoiding you. I've been busy. Busy flirting with customers?" There it was. Clara's hand stilled on the glass. "What are you talking about?" "Tommy saw you today, at the diner. Said you were all smiles and giggles with some guy in an expensive suit." Derek crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. His casual posture was betrayed by the tension in his jaw. "Some older guy. Real cozy," he said. Clara's mind raced back to the afternoon, to Vittorio Moretti, and those dark, penetrating eyes. "That wasn't Derek, he was just a customer. I was doing my job." "Your job is to serve food, not to flirt." "I wasn't flirting." Her voice rose despite her best efforts to stay calm. "He ordered food. I brought it to him. That's all that happened." Derek pushed off from the wall, moving closer. Not threatening exactly, but close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Tommy said you two talked for a while. Said the guy was asking you questions. Personal questions. He asked my name. That's hardly personal. Did you give him your number?" "What? No, of course not." "Then why are you getting so defensive?" And there it was. The trap. If she stayed calm, she was hiding something. If she got upset, she was being too emotional. There was no right answer because the question itself was designed to put her on the defensive. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Derek, I think you should go. We're both tired, you've been drinking, and this conversation isn't going anywhere good." His expression shifted, softening in that way that had fooled her so many times before. "You're right. I'm sorry. I don't know why I get like this." He reached for her hand and she let him take it, too tired to pull away. "It's just, I love you so much, Clara. The thought of losing you to someone else, someone who could give you more than I can, it makes me crazy. You're not going to lose me. Promise?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to remember what she'd seen when they first met. He'd been charming then, attentive in ways that made her feel special. He'd had dreams, talked about starting his own business, about the life they'd build together. When had that version of Derek disappeared? Or had he ever really existed at all? "I promise," she said, because it was easier than the truth. Derek smiled and leaned down to kiss her forehead, right at the edge of where the bruise was hidden under makeup. Clara flinched involuntarily, and his smile faltered. "Does it still hurt?" "A little. I really am sorry about that. You know I never mean to..." He was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. They both froze. Clara wasn't expecting anyone. She never had visitors. Derek had systematically isolated her from the few friends she'd made in the city, always finding reasons why they shouldn't come over, why Clara shouldn't go out. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Are you expecting someone?" Derek's voice had gone cold. "No, I have no idea who that could be." Derek moved to the door, his body language shifting into something aggressive. He yanked it open, ready to confront whoever was on the other side. The words died on his lips. Vittorio Moretti stood in the hallway, flanked by the same large bodyguard from the diner. He was still in his suit, though he'd removed his tie. Water droplets clung to his hair and shoulders, suggesting he'd only recently come in from the rain. His dark eyes swept over Derek, then moved past him to find Clara standing frozen in the kitchenette. "Good evening," Vittorio said, his voice perfectly polite. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Derek found his voice, though it had lost some of its earlier bravado. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm someone who had business in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on Clara, make sure she got home safely in this weather." Vittorio's gaze hadn't left Clara's face. The streets can be dangerous at night. The implicit message was clear. He knew where she lived. He'd come here deliberately. This wasn't a coincidence. Derek's face had gone pale. Clara watched as recognition dawned. He might not know Vittorio personally, but he knew the type. The expensive suit, the bodyguard, the casual authority that suggested he was used to people stepping aside when he walked into a room. She's fine, Derek said, trying to block the doorway with his body. She's with me, so you can go now. Vittorio smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I don't believe we've been introduced. You must be Derek. The use of his name made Derek take an involuntary step back. How do you know my name? I make it my business to know things. Vittorio stepped forward, not aggressively, but with enough confidence that Derek had no choice but to move aside or be walked through, particularly when it concerns people under my protection. Clara's heart was hammering. Mr. Moretti, I don't understand. Why are you here? He turned to face her fully now, and something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because this afternoon I saw something that concerned me, and I've learned over the years that when something concerns me, it's usually worth investigating. There's nothing to investigate, Derek interjected, trying to reassert control of the situation. Clara and I had a little accident last night. It was nothing. She already told you it was a cabinet door. She did tell me that. Vittorio's voice remained calm, almost pleasant, and we both know it was a lie. The temperature in the small apartment seemed to drop. Clara found herself unable to breathe, caught between these two men in her tiny space that suddenly felt suffocating. Derek's hands clenched into fists. You need to leave. Now. This is none of your business. I'm making it my business. Why? What is she to you? Just some waitress who served you lunch. Vittorio's jaw tightened, the first real emotion Clara had seen from him. He moved further into the apartment, his bodyguard remaining by the door, effectively blocking any exit. He looked around slowly, taking in the sparse furnishings, the single window, the flowers Derek had brought sitting wilted on the counter. Do you know what I do, Derek? Vittorio asked conversationally. I've heard things. Then you know I'm a man who values loyalty, respect, the protection of those who can't protect themselves. He picked up the bouquet of flowers, examining them with apparent interest. I'm also a man who has very little patience for bullies. I'm not a bully. Clara, tell him. Tell him about us. Clara's mouth opened, but no words came out. What could she say? That Derek hadn't always been like this? That she still sometimes saw glimpses of the man she'd fallen for? That she was too tired and too scared to know what the truth even was anymore? Vittorio set the flowers down and turned to Derek. I'm going to make this very simple. You have two choices. The first choice is that you leave this apartment right now, tonight, and you don't come back. Ever. You don't call Clara. You don't text her. You don't have your friends watch the diner where she works. You remove yourself from her life completely. And if I don't? Derek's voice was trying for defiant but landing somewhere closer to nervous. Then we move to choice number 2. And trust me when I say you don't want choice number 2. Vittorio's expression remained perfectly calm, but there was steel underneath the polish. I have resources, Derek. Connections. I could make your life very complicated in ways you can't even imagine. Legal complications, financial complications, the kind that follow you around for years. Derek looked at Clara desperately. You're going to let him do this? Threaten me? After everything we've been through? Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. Part of her wanted to defend Derek, to smooth things over the way she always did. But another part, a part that had been silent for too long, was screaming at her to let this happen, to let someone finally intervene in the nightmare her life had become. I think, her voice came out barely above a whisper, I think you should go, Derek. Clara, please, just go. Derek stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through anger, betrayal, and finally something that might have been genuine hurt. But Clara had learned not to trust his emotions. They changed too quickly, shifted too easily into weapons used against her. He grabbed his jacket from where he'd tossed it over the back of a chair. Fine, but this isn't over. You can't just kick me out of your life because He stopped himself, glancing at Vittorio, clearly thinking better of whatever insult he'd been about to use. This isn't over, he repeated lamely. Yeah, it is, Vittorio said quietly. And Derek? If I hear that you've contacted Clara, if I hear that you've so much as driven down her street, we'll be having a much different conversation. The kind that doesn't happen in a lady's apartment, understood? Derek's face had gone from pale to flushed red. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually try to fight. He'd always had more pride than sense, but something in Vittorio's eyes must have convinced him otherwise. He stormed past the bodyguard and out the door, his footsteps echoing angrily down the stairwell. The silence he left behind was deafening. Clara stood motionless in her kitchenette, her arms wrapped around herself, unable to process what had just happened. She was alone now with Vittorio Moretti, A man she'd met only hours ago. A man who by all accounts was dangerous. A man who just chased her boyfriend out of her apartment with barely veiled threats. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt numb. "How did you find me?" she asked finally. "I told you. I make it my business to know things." He moved to her single window, looking out at the rain-soaked night. "It wasn't difficult. I own the building." Clara's eyes widened. "You own this building?" "I own several buildings in this neighborhood. When I want to find someone who works in my territory, it takes a phone call. Maybe two." He turned back to face her. "The more interesting question is why I wanted to find you." "Why did you?" Vittorio was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. 5 years ago, I lost my wife, Gianna. She was everything. We'd been married for 8 years when she got sick. Cancer. It took her fast. Too fast. 6 months from diagnosis to..." He paused, his jaw working. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. Before Gianna met me, she was with another man. He hurt her. Not so differently from how Derek hurts you." Clara's throat tightened. "Mr. Moretti, Vittorio, please. Vittorio, I appreciate what you did tonight. But Derek and I, it's complicated." "No, it's not." His voice was gentle but firm. "It's only complicated because he's made you believe it is. That's what men like him do. They convince you that their behavior is somehow your fault. That if you were just better, quieter, more understanding, they wouldn't have to hurt you." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, and she didn't have the energy to stop them. "You don't understand. I have nowhere to go. No family who'll take me in. I burned those bridges when I moved here for him. No savings because he convinced me we should have joint accounts, and then somehow all the money keeps disappearing. This apartment is all I have, and even the rent here. You're struggling." Vittorio finished for her. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I'm behind 2 months. My landlord has been patient, but I don't know how much longer." She stopped. "Wait, you said you own this building." "I do. So you're my landlord?" "Technically, yes." Clara laughed. A brittle, slightly hysterical sound. "So you could evict me." "I could. I won't." He pulled a card from his jacket pocket and set it on the counter. "This has my private number. If Derek comes back, when Derek comes back, because men like him always do, you call me immediately. Day or night, it doesn't matter." "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Vittorio moved toward the door, his bodyguard stepping aside to let him pass. At the threshold, he paused and looked back at her. "Because Gianna used to hide her bruises, too. Used to make excuses for him. And I wasn't there to help her then. She'd already left him when we met, but the damage, it stayed with her. Shadows she carried until the day she died." His expression was raw in a way that made him suddenly seem human, vulnerable. "I can't save her, but maybe I can do this. I'm not your wife." "No, you're not. But maybe that doesn't matter." He opened the door, then turned back one more time. "The rent you're behind on? Consider it forgiven. And next month's too. Give yourself some breathing room, Clara. Figure out what you want your life to look like without someone's fist deciding for you." Then he was gone, the bodyguard closing the door softly behind them. Clara stood alone in her apartment, staring at the business card on her counter. She could hear their footsteps descending the stairs, hear the building's entrance door open and close. Through her window, she watched the black Mercedes pull away into the rainy night. Her phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "This isn't over. You think he scares me? You think some rich criminal owns you now? I'll be back. Count on it." Clara's hands were shaking as she picked up Vittorio's card. Embossed on heavy stock paper, Vittorio Moretti, followed by a phone number. No business name, no address, just a name and a number. She thought about Maria's warning at the diner. Men like him, they don't do anything without expecting something back. She thought about Derek's text, the implicit threat in those words. She thought about the bruise hidden under her makeup and all the other bruises that had come before it. Most of all, she thought about Vittorio's eyes when he'd talked about his wife. The grief there, still raw after 5 years. The regret, the determination. "I can't save her, but maybe I can do this." Clara set the card back down and moved to the window. The rain was finally starting to let up, the storm moving on to drench some other part of the city. Brooklyn stretched out before her, millions of lights and millions of windows, each one representing someone with their own complications, their own struggles. She wondered how many of them were standing in their apartments right now, holding a stranger's business card, trying to decide whether to trust the most dangerous kind of help. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Derek, more aggressive this time. Then another, and another. Clara turned the phone off and set it face down on the counter. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out what came next. Tomorrow she'd have to process what had happened, what it meant, what consequences might come from Vittorio Moretti deciding to involve himself in her life. But tonight, for the first time in 8 months, Derek wasn't in her apartment, wasn't touching her, wasn't making her feel small, wasn't filling the space with his volatile moods. Tonight, she could breathe. Clara crawled into her Murphy bed fully clothed, too exhausted to even change. As she closed her eyes, she found herself thinking about those dark eyes again, about the way Vittorio had stood between her and Derek without raising his voice, without any overt threat, but with enough presence to make it clear who held the power in that room. It should have terrified her. Maybe it did, a little. But more than that, it had made her feel something she'd almost forgotten: protected. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. In the sudden quiet, Clara could hear sirens in the distance, the perpetual soundtrack of the city. She pulled the thin comforter up to her chin and let herself drift toward sleep. She didn't hear the car that parked across the street an hour later, didn't see the figure inside watching her darkened window with patient attention, didn't know that Vittorio Moretti had posted one of his men to keep watch, just in case Derek decided to come back tonight. She only knew that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt the smallest glimmer of hope, and sometimes that was enough. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through her window, a rare gift in her apartment that usually only caught light for about an hour each morning. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, before the events of the previous night came flooding back. Derek, Vittorio Moretti, the business card on her counter. She sat up slowly, her body aching in that familiar way that had become normal over the past months. But something was different. The apartment felt lighter somehow, as if a heavy presence had been lifted. Derek's absence was almost tangible, a relief she could feel in her bones. Her phone, still face down where she'd left it, showed 15 missed calls and 23 text messages when she finally turned it on, all from Derek. She deleted them without reading, then blocked his number. It felt both empowering and terrifying, like cutting a rope while still not sure if she'd been tied to safety or drowning. The morning shift at Rosie's started at 6. Clara showered, applied her makeup with shaking hands. The bruise was fading to a yellowish green now, and dressed in her uniform. She picked up Vittorio's business card from the counter, studied it for a long moment, then tucked it into her wallet before heading out. The morning air was crisp and clean after yesterday's rain. Brooklyn was waking up around her, bodega owners rolling up their metal shutters, the coffee cart guy on the corner setting up his operation, early commuters hurrying toward the subway with their travel mugs and newspapers. Clara walked the 3 blocks to the diner, hyper-aware of her surroundings in a way she hadn't been before. Was that car following her? Was that man across the street watching? Derek's text messages had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. This isn't over. The words played on repeat in her mind. Maria was already at the diner when Clara arrived, prepping the coffee station. She took one look at Clara's face and immediately pulled her aside. "What happened? You look like you didn't sleep." "I slept fine. Actually better than I have in weeks." "Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Clara glanced around the empty diner. Luis wasn't in yet, and old Mr. Chen wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. "Derek came by my apartment last night." Maria's face darkened. And someone else came by too. That man from yesterday, Vittorio Moretti." Maria's eyes widened. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, what did he want?" He made Derek leave, told him not to come back. Ever." Clara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Maria, he owns my building. He knew where I lived. He just showed up. Honey, I told you, men like him don't do anything without a reason." "What does he want from you?" "He says he just wants to help. That his wife was in a similar situation before he met her, and he couldn't save her. She passed away a few years ago. So now he wants to—" Clara trailed off, realizing how absurd it sounded when spoken aloud. "So now he wants to save you instead?" Maria shook her head slowly. "Clara, that's not how men like Vittorio Moretti operate. They don't have white knight complexes. They have agendas." I know it doesn't make sense. But Maria, Derek has been texting me nonstop, threatening messages, and for the first time in months I actually feel like maybe I don't have to handle this alone." Maria squeezed her hand. "Just be careful, please. I don't want to see you trade one dangerous situation for another." The morning shift passed in its usual rhythm. Clara served coffee and eggs, smiled at regulars, and tried not to think about the business card in her wallet, or the deleted text messages, or the fact that somewhere in Brooklyn, Derek was probably planning his next move. Around 11, the lunch crowd started filtering in. Clara was taking an order from a table of construction workers when the door chimed, and she felt the atmosphere shift in that now familiar way. Vittorio Moretti walked in alone this time. No bodyguards, no associates. He wore dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that probably cost more than Clara made in a month. Several customers looked up, recognized him, and quickly returned to their meals with studied disinterest. He took the same booth as before, the corner one with a view of the door. When Clara approached with her notepad, he was already reading the menu, though she suspected he'd memorized it yesterday. "Good morning," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Good morning, Clara." He looked up, and those dark eyes assessed her face with the same intensity as before. "The bruising is fading." "Yes. Another day or two, and it should be mostly gone." "How did you sleep?" The question was casual but weighted with meaning. "Better than I expected, actually. Thank you for what you did last night." "You don't need to thank me." He closed the menu. "I'll have the Italian wedding soup and a cappuccino." Clara wrote it down, acutely aware that other customers were watching this interaction with poorly concealed curiosity. "Coming right up." She put the order in and made the cappuccino, her hands remarkably steady. When she brought it to the table, Vittorio was on his phone speaking in Italian. He ended the call as she set down the cup. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working." "Sit down anyway." Just for a moment, Clara glanced at Maria, who was watching from behind the counter with concern etched on her face. The lunch rush hadn't hit full force yet, and her other tables were settled. She slid into the booth across from Vittorio, feeling like she was crossing some invisible line. "I want you to understand something," Vittorio said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Last night I intervened in a situation that concerned me, but I don't want you to feel obligated to me in any way. You're not in my debt. You don't owe me anything. Then why are you here?" "Because I wanted to see that you were all right, and because I suspect Derek might try to contact you again, despite my warning." Clara's throat tightened. "He already has. Text messages." "I blocked his number." Something flickered across Vittorio's face. Approval, maybe, or satisfaction. That was smart. But blocking his number won't stop him entirely. Men like Derek, they don't give up easily when they feel they're losing control. "I know." Clara's hands twisted in her lap under the table. "He knows my schedule. He knows where I work, where I live. If he really wants to find me, he won't." "You can't know that." "Actually, I can." Vittorio leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but his eyes alert. "I have someone watching your building. Discreetly. If Derek comes anywhere near your block, I'll know about it." Clara's breath caught. "You have someone watching me. Watching for threats to you, there's a difference." "Is there?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like I've gone from one man controlling my life to another." To her surprise, Vittorio smiled. A genuine smile that transformed his usually stern features. "You're right. I apologize. I should have asked first. Would you like me to have someone watching out for potential threats to your safety?" The rephrasing made all the difference. He was giving her a choice, not making a decision for her. "Yes," Clara admitted. "Yes, I would. That actually makes me feel a little better." "Good. Then that's what we'll do." Luis rang the bell from the kitchen. "Your soup is ready." Clara stood, smoothing down her apron. "Mr. Moretti." "Vittorio." "Vittorio. I don't understand why you're doing this, but I'm grateful. Truly." She brought him his soup and returned to her other tables, but she remained hyper-aware of his presence in that corner booth. He ate slowly, occasionally looking at his phone, and twice more she caught him watching her as she worked. Not in a predatory way, in a protective way, like he was assessing potential threats in the environment. After he finished eating, he sat for another hour, nursing an espresso and working on a laptop he'd pulled from a leather bag. Several men came in and approached his table for brief, quiet conversations. Clara tried not to eavesdrop, but she caught fragments. Discussions about property, about shipments, about someone who owed money. She was refilling coffee for Mr. Chen when she heard Vittorio's voice rise slightly, still controlled but with an edge to it. "I don't care what his excuse is. If the payment isn't made by Friday, we proceed with alternative arrangements." "Am I clear?" The man he was speaking to, younger, nervous, nodded rapidly and left the diner. Vittorio returned to his laptop as if nothing had happened. Maria appeared at Clara's elbow. "You see that? That's who he really is. Not some knight in shining armor. A businessman who deals in fear and leverage. I know what he is, Clara said quietly. But right now, having someone like that on my side doesn't feel like the worst thing in the world. Around 2 o'clock, the lunch crowd had dispersed and the diner settled into its afternoon lull. Vittorio closed his laptop and signaled for the check. Clara brought it over, and again he left far too much money. I can't keep accepting tips like this, she said. Then consider it an investment in the establishment. The food is good and the company is pleasant. He stood, gathering his things. Walk out with me for a moment? I'm still on shift for another hour. Maria can cover for you. I just need 5 minutes. Clara looked at Maria, who gave a tiny, reluctant nod. They stepped outside together into the autumn afternoon. The air had that particular clarity that came after rain. Everything sharp-edged and vivid. Vittorio's Mercedes was parked at the curb. Illegally, Clara noticed, but somehow she doubted he'd get a ticket. He leaned against it, arms crossed, looking at her with that assessing gaze. I want to show you something, he said, if you're willing. Show me what? Where I work, where I spend most of my time. I think it might help you understand who I am, what I do, so you can make an informed decision about whether you want my continued involvement in your situation. Clara hesitated. Getting into a car with Vittorio Moretti felt like a threshold she couldn't uncross. When? Tomorrow. It's your day off, yes? How do you know my schedule? I asked Maria. She's very protective of you, by the way. Threatened me with a rolling pin if I hurt you. Despite everything, Clara laughed. That sounds like Maria. So, tomorrow, I'll pick you up at your apartment at 10. I'll show you my world, answer any questions you have, and then bring you home. No obligations, no expectations, just transparency. Clara thought about Derek's text messages, about the bruise on her face that was finally fading, about the fact that for the first time in months, she'd slept through the night without jerking awake in fear, about Maria's warnings and her own instincts that told her Vittorio Moretti was dangerous in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. But he was also the only person who'd seen her clearly in a very long time, who'd looked past her carefully constructed lies and decided she was worth protecting. Okay, she heard herself say. Tomorrow at 10. Good. He opened the car door, then paused. Clara, Derek tried to come to your building last night around 3 in the morning. Her blood ran cold. What? My man turned him away. Derek was intoxicated, agitated. He was told in very clear terms that if he returned, there would be consequences. Legal consequences that I have the resources to pursue. He left. You didn't tell me this earlier. I didn't want to frighten you during your shift. But I wanted you to know before tomorrow, to understand that this isn't hypothetical. Derek is actively trying to regain access to your life. The question is whether you want to keep running from that reality or face it with support. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the sun. I'm tired of running. Then tomorrow, we'll talk about alternatives. He slid into the Mercedes. Get some rest tonight, Clara. I'll see you in the morning. She watched him drive away, then returned to the diner where Maria was waiting with crossed arms and a worried expression. What did he want? To show me who he really is. Tomorrow. And you said yes? I said yes. Maria shook her head. I hope you know what you're doing, honey. I don't, Clara admitted. But I know I can't keep doing what I've been doing. Something has to change. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Clara's mind kept circling back to Derek at her building in the middle of the night, drunk and angry. What would have happened if Vittorio's man hadn't been there? Would Derek have broken down her door? Hurt her worse than before? The thought made her nauseated. When her shift ended at 7, she walked home with her keys between her fingers, hyper alert to every shadow and footstep. She didn't see anyone following her, but she felt watched. Though whether that was Vittorio's protection or her own paranoia, she couldn't say. Her apartment felt safe when she entered, checking behind the door and in the bathroom out of habit. She heated up leftover soup, ate it mechanically, then tried to watch television but couldn't focus. Finally, she pulled out Vittorio's business card and stared at it. What was she doing? Getting involved with a man who by all accounts ran criminal operations in Brooklyn? A man who had people follow other people, who made veiled threats, who operated in a world of violence and leverage? But then, she thought about Derek's hands around her throat last month. About the time he'd shoved her so hard she'd hit her head on the doorframe, about the constant walking on eggshells, never knowing which version of him would come through the door. Her phone buzzed, a new number she didn't recognize. Her heart jumped before she read the message. This is Marco, Mr. Moretti's associate. Just checking in. Everything quiet on your street tonight. Sleep well. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like someone giving a damn whether she lived or died. Clara texted back, "Thank you." The response was immediate. "My pleasure, Miss Clara." She went to bed early, exhausted from the emotional whiplash of the past 2 days. But before she turned out the light, she set her alarm for 8, giving herself plenty of time to get ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Outside her window, in a nondescript sedan across the street, Marco sat with a thermos of coffee and a clear view of her building's entrance. His phone buzzed with a text from Vittorio. "Any activity?" Marco responded. "All quiet, she's safe." "Good. Stay until morning shift arrives at 6, then get some rest." "Will do, boss." Marco settled back in his seat, eyes on the building. This was unusual. Vittorio didn't typically involve himself in personal situations. He was a businessman, not a bodyguard service. But Marco had worked for Vittorio long enough to recognize when his boss was personally invested in something. It had been 5 years since Gianna died. 5 years of watching Vittorio throw himself into work, into expansion, into anything that kept him from feeling the loss. This was the first time Marco had seen something else in his boss's eyes when he talked about someone. Interest, concern, maybe even the beginnings of something more. Marco hoped the girl knew what she was getting into. Vittorio's world wasn't kind to civilians. But then again, from what Marco had gathered, her world hadn't been particularly kind either. Maybe they'd balance each other out. Or maybe this would end in disaster. Either way, Marco's job was to keep her safe. And that's exactly what he'd do. Inside her apartment, Clara finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of dark eyes and quiet authority, of Derek's rage and Vittorio's calm, of being caught between two worlds and not knowing which one would ultimately claim her. Tomorrow would bring answers, or at least it would bring understanding. For now, she slept, protected by a man she barely knew, from a man she wished she'd never met. And somewhere in Brooklyn, Derek sat in his own apartment staring at his phone, planning his next move. Because men like Derek never accepted loss, never admitted defeat. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, Clara wouldn't be facing it alone. The black Mercedes arrived precisely at 10. Clara had changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on jeans and a simple sweater, casual but presentable. She watched from her window as Vittorio stepped out, looking up at her building with that same assessing gaze. Her phone buzzed. "I'm downstairs whenever you're ready. No rush." Clara grabbed her jacket and headed down. Vittorio opened the car door for her, and she slid into the leather interior, immediately enveloped by the scent of expensive cologne and new car. "Good morning," he said, settling into the driver's seat. "No bodyguard today, just the 2 of them." "Morning. Where are we going?" "My office, it's in Red Hook by the waterfront." They drove through Brooklyn in comfortable silence, the city passing by in a blur of brownstones and businesses. Clara studied Vittorio's profile, the strong jaw, the silver threading through his dark hair, the way his hands rested confidently on the steering wheel. "You're nervous," he observed without looking at her. "Wouldn't you be?" "Probably. But I want you to understand something, Clara. What I'm going to show you today, it's not to intimidate you. It's so you can make an informed choice about whether you want my help." The office was in a renovated warehouse overlooking the water. Inside, it was surprisingly tasteful. Exposed brick, modern furniture, large windows with views of the harbor. Several people worked at desks, all of whom nodded respectfully as Vittorio passed. His private office occupied the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive desk, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes. But what caught Clara's attention was the wall of photographs. Vittorio with various people, clearly spanning decades. "That's Gianna," he said, pointing to a photo of a beautiful woman with dark hair and a radiant smile. "My wife. She was beautiful. She was everything." He moved to stand beside her. "That's my father. He built the foundation of what I run now. Import, export, real estate, construction, all legitimate businesses. And the illegitimate ones?" Vittorio met her eyes. "I won't lie to you. Some of what I do operates in gray areas, but I don't hurt innocent people. I provide services, protection, opportunities. I settle disputes. In neighborhoods where the police won't help, people come to me." Clara absorbed this, understanding that he was trusting her with truth. "Why show me this?" "Because I want you to know who's protecting you. Not some fantasy of a white knight, but a real person with complications and flaws." He paused. And because I wanted to spend time with you away from the diner, to talk without an audience. They sat on the leather sofa by the window. Vittorio poured them both water from a crystal decanter. Tell me about Derek, he said. How did it start? Clara found herself opening up, telling him about the charming man she'd met, how slowly the control had started, how gradually the violence had escalated. Vittorio listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker. Men like him, he said finally. They see kindness as weakness. Your compassion, your willingness to see the best in him. He weaponized it. I feel so stupid. You're not stupid. You're human. He shifted slightly toward her. Clara, I need to tell you something. Derek has been asking around about you, about me. He's planning something. Her stomach dropped. What kind of something? I don't know yet, but I want you to be careful. Maybe stay somewhere else for a few days. I'm not running anymore, Clara interrupted. I'm tired of being afraid. Vittorio studied her and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Then we do this differently. We face him together. What does that mean? It means you're not alone anymore. Whatever Derek does next, you'll have resources, protection, support. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. If you want them. His hand was warm, solid. Clara looked down at their intertwined fingers. This dangerous man offering safety, this stranger who'd become her unlikely protector. I want them, she whispered. They sat there as the morning light streamed through the windows, the city sprawling below them. Two broken people finding unexpected connection in the ruins of their separate traumas. Outside, in a car parked down the street, Derek watched through binoculars, his jaw clenched, rage building in his chest. He'd followed Clara from her apartment, watched her get into Moretti's car, tracked them here. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Yeah, it's me. I need a favor, and I need it today. Inside the office, Clara's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. Heavy breathing then. You think you're safe with him? You think I can't reach you? Clara's hand tightened on Vittorio's. He saw her expression change, immediately understood. Put it on speaker, he said quietly. She did. Derek's voice filled the office. This isn't over, Clara. Not even close. You're mine. You'll always be mine. And your rich boyfriend? He can't watch you every second. Vittorio leaned forward. Derek, this is your last warning. Walk away now while you still can. Or what? You'll have me hurt? Do it. See what happens when the police start investigating your whole operation. The line went dead. Vittorio was already on his phone, speaking rapid Italian. When he finished, he turned to Clara with grim determination. He's escalating. We need to end this. Today. The silence in Vittorio's office felt heavy after Derek's call. Clara sat frozen on the leather sofa, her hand still gripping Vittorio's, her mind racing through possibilities. None of them good. Derek had always been unpredictable when cornered, and now he was cornered by someone far more powerful than Clara had ever been. What did you tell your people? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Vittorio set his phone down carefully. I told them to find out where Derek is right now, who he's with, what he's planning. He turned to face her fully. But Clara, I need you to understand something. How we handle this next part, that's your decision, not mine. What do you mean? I can make Derek disappear from your life in ways that are permanent. Not, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Not through violence, but I have connections. Legal connections. Financial connections. I can ensure he faces consequences for what he's done to you. Real consequences. Or we can handle this more directly. Confront him together with police present and let the system work. Clara stared out at the harbor, watching a ferry cut through the gray water. 6 months ago, she would have chosen the path of least conflict, the one that might somehow preserve Derek's dignity, because that's what she'd been conditioned to do. Protect his ego, minimize his anger, keep the peace at any cost. But that Clara felt like a stranger now. I want to face him, she said finally, but not alone, and not without protection. I need him to see that I'm not afraid anymore, that he doesn't control me. Vittorio nodded slowly. Then we do it your way, but we do it smart. He pulled out his phone again. I'm calling someone, a lawyer who specializes in domestic situations. She's helped several women in your position before. I can't afford a lawyer. You're not paying. I am. He held up a hand before she could protest. This isn't charity, Clara. Consider it an investment in justice. Besides, Gianna would have wanted me to do this. She always said that if she'd had proper legal support earlier, She might have escaped her situation sooner. The lawyer, Patricia Chen, arrived within an hour. She was in her mid-40s, sharply dressed, with kind eyes that had clearly seen their share of difficult cases. She listened as Clara recounted the past 8 months, the escalating control, the emotional manipulation, the physical violence, the threats. Patricia took notes, asked clarifying questions, and never once made Clara feel judged or weak. "You have enough for a restraining order," Patricia said finally. "The text messages alone would support it. The photographs of your injuries. Do you have any?" Clara shook her head miserably. "I always covered them up. I never thought to document them. That's common. Most people don't think about building a legal case when they're just trying to survive." Patricia pulled out several forms. "But we can move forward with what we have. The question is whether you want to file assault charges as well. Will they stick without photographs? Potentially, especially with testimony from people who witnessed the aftermath, co-workers, friends. The bruise on your face was recent enough that others saw it, correct?" Clara thought of Maria, of the concerned questions, of the way even some customers at the diner had noticed. "Yes, several people. Then we have options." Patricia leaned forward. "But Clara, I need you to understand something. Filing these charges will make Derek angry. Very angry. People in his position often escalate when they feel they're losing control completely. You'll need to take precautions." "She'll have them," Vittorio said quietly from where he stood by the window. "Round-the-clock protection until this is resolved." Patricia glanced at him, and something unspoken passed between them. An understanding born of previous cases. Previous women protected by Vittorio's particular brand of justice. Good. Then let's proceed. They spent the next 2 hours filling out paperwork, documenting everything Clara could remember. Patricia recorded her statement, asked for contact information for potential witnesses, and outlined the next steps. By the time they finished, Clara felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. For the first time, she was fighting back with real weapons, legal ones, supported by people who knew how to navigate the system. As Patricia gathered her materials, Vittorio's phone rang. He stepped away to take the call, his expression darkening as he listened. When he returned, his jaw was set in a grim line. "My people found Derek. He's at a bar in Sunset Park. He's been drinking since this morning, showing people your picture, asking if anyone knows where you might be hiding." Clara's blood ran cold. "What if he goes to the diner? Maria's there. Mr. Chen. Luis, I can't put them in danger. I've already sent someone to watch the diner discreetly. If Derek shows up, they'll call the police immediately." Vittorio moved to sit beside her again. "But I think we should get ahead of this. Meet with him in a controlled environment, with witnesses present, and serve him with the restraining order papers there. You want me to see him today?" "I think waiting gives him more time to spiral, more time to plan something desperate. If we control when and where the confrontation happens, we control the outcome." Patricia nodded her agreement. "It's actually a sound strategy. Public place, multiple witnesses, law enforcement on standby. He won't be able to claim later that anything was done improperly." Clara's hands were shaking. This morning she'd woken up not knowing what to expect from today. Now she was potentially hours away from facing Derek with the full weight of legal protection behind her. "Where would we do this?" "Rosie's Diner," Vittorio said. "After closing. He knows you work there. If I have someone leak to him that you'll be there tonight at 9, he'll come. He won't be able to resist the opportunity. You want to use me as bait? I want to give you a chance to take your power back. On your terms, in your space, with support surrounding you." His dark eyes held hers. "But only if you're ready. Only if you want this." Clara thought about the past 8 months, about the fear that had become her constant companion, about the woman she'd been before Derek, confident, hopeful, full of dreams, about the woman she wanted to become again. "I'm ready," she said. The plan came together quickly. Patricia would be present as Clara's legal representative. Vittorio would be there as well, along with Marco and another associate. 2 police officers, ones that Patricia had worked with before on domestic cases, would be stationed outside, ready to intervene if Derek became aggressive. And Maria insisted on being there too, despite everyone's protests about potential danger. "That girl is like a daughter to me," Maria had said when Vittorio called to explain the plan. "I'm not letting her face that monster without me there. Besides, it's my diner too. I have every right to be present." As the afternoon faded into evening, Clara returned to her apartment to change and prepare herself mentally. Vittorio's associate drove her, She didn't trust herself behind a wheel right now and waited outside while she got ready. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror looking at her reflection. The bruise was barely visible now under the makeup, just a faint shadow that would fade completely in another few days. But the woman looking back at her was different than the one who'd hidden that bruise just days ago. Her eyes held something new. Determination, maybe. Or just the exhaustion of being afraid for so long. Clara changed into jeans and a sweater, pulled her hair back into a ponytail and took a deep breath. Then she picked up her phone and recorded a video, something Patricia had suggested. My name is Clara Rodriguez. I'm 24 years old. If something happens to me tonight, I want it known that I'm not suicidal. I'm not careless. I'm taking control of my life back from someone who hurt me, and I'm doing it with support from people who care about my safety. Whatever Derek Mitchell might claim afterward, I'm making this choice voluntarily and with clear mind. She paused. And I'm not afraid anymore. She sent the video to Patricia, to Maria, and to Vittorio. Then she deleted it from her phone. Derek had accessed her phone before, gone through her messages and photos. She wouldn't give him that advantage again. The drive to Rosie's diner felt surreal. The streets of Brooklyn passed by in their familiar patterns, but everything felt heightened somehow. Colors brighter, sounds sharper, her awareness of every detail crystalline. They arrived at 8:30. The diner's lights were on, but the closed sign hung on the door. Inside, Maria was waiting with fresh coffee. Patricia sat in one booth reviewing her notes. Vittorio stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low tones. When he saw Clara enter, he ended his call and crossed to her immediately. How are you feeling? Terrified. Determined. Both at once. That's normal. That's good, actually. He guided her to sit at the counter. Derek left the bar about 20 minutes ago. My people made sure he overheard a conversation about you being here tonight. He's on his way. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. How long? Maybe 15 minutes. Maria poured Clara a cup of coffee with shaking hands. You're the bravest person I know, honey. What you're doing tonight, standing up for yourself like this, that takes more courage than running. I'm not sure it's courage. I think I'm just tired of being scared. That's what courage is, Vittorio said quietly, doing what needs to be done despite the fear. They waited in tense silence. Marco and the other associate positioned themselves strategically. Marco by the kitchen with a clear view of the entrance, the other man near the back exit. Patricia reviewed final instructions with Clara about what to say and, more importantly, what not to say. Let him do most of the talking, Patricia advised. Men like Derek, they can't help but incriminate themselves when given the opportunity. Just stay calm, stay firm, and remember that you're not alone. At 8:53, headlights swept across the diner's windows. A car pulled up outside. Derek's beat-up Honda, immediately recognizable. The engine cut off. Through the window, Clara could see him sitting in the driver's seat staring at the diner, working up his nerve or his rage or both. Vittorio moved to stand near Clara but not beside her, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to let her have this moment. Remember, he said softly, you're in control here. Not him, not anymore. The car door opened. Derek stepped out, and even from a distance, Clara could see the tension in his body, the aggressive set of his shoulders. He walked toward the diner like a man going into battle. The door chimed as he pushed it open. Derek stood in the entrance, his eyes immediately finding Clara at the counter. His gaze swept the room, taking in Vittorio, Patricia, Maria, the two large men positioned strategically throughout the space. His expression cycled through confusion, then anger, then something approaching fear before settling back on defiance. What is this? His voice was rough, slightly slurred. Some kind of intervention? Derek. Clara was amazed at how steady her voice sounded. Thank you for coming. We need to talk. We? Since when do you need an audience to talk to your boyfriend? He took a step further inside, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides, a gesture Clara recognized as a precursor to violence. I'm not your girlfriend anymore. That's not your decision to make. Actually, it is, Patricia interjected, standing smoothly. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Patricia Chen, Ms. Rodriguez's attorney. We're here tonight to serve you with legal documents and to make clear that any further contact with my client will result in criminal charges. Derek's laugh was bitter, aggressive. Legal documents? Clara, what have you done? What lies have you been telling these people? No lies, Clara said, standing now too. Her legs felt shaky but held. Just the truth. About the past 8 months. About what you've done to me. Derek's face flushed red. Everything I did was because I love you, because you pushed me to it. You and your attitude, your disrespect. I never disrespected you. I disagreed with you sometimes. I had opinions. That's not disrespect, Derek. That's being a person. You don't talk to me like that. He moved forward aggressively. Marco shifted position, a subtle movement that nonetheless stopped Derek in his tracks. For the first time, Derek seemed to fully register that he was outnumbered and outmatched. "This is insane," he said, his voice rising. "Clara, these people are manipulating you. That guy," he pointed at Vittorio, "he's a criminal. Everyone knows it. And you're taking his side over mine? Over your own boyfriend who's been with you? Supported you?" "Supported me?" Clara's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. "You isolated me from my family. You took control of my bank account. You monitored my phone, my schedule, my conversations. You made me feel small and worthless and afraid. That's not support, Derek. That's control. Because I love you. Love doesn't leave bruises." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Derek's mouth opened and closed, searching for a response, an excuse, a justification. Patricia stepped forward, holding out an envelope. "Mr. Mitchell, this is a restraining order. You're required to stay at least 500 feet away from Ms. Rodriguez at all times. You may not contact her by phone, text, email, social media, or through any third party. You may not approach her place of employment or residence. Violation of this order is a criminal offense." Derek stared at the envelope like it was a snake. "I'm not taking that. Your acceptance isn't required. You've been served. The order is now in effect." Patricia's voice was professional, unflappable. "Additionally, Ms. Rodriguez is filing assault charges for the incident that occurred 4 days ago, which resulted in the visible facial injuries witnessed by multiple parties. That was an accident. She walked into a—" "No more lies, Derek," Clara interrupted. Her voice was stronger now, finding its power. "We're done with the lies. You hit me. You've hit me before. You've grabbed me, shoved me, intimidated me, and I'm done pretending it didn't happen. I'm done protecting you from the consequences of your own actions." Derek's expression crumbled, cycling rapidly through rage, disbelief, and something that might have been genuine devastation. "Clara, please, don't do this. We can work this out. I'll get help. I'll go to counseling. Whatever you need. What I need is for you to leave my life. Completely. I can't do that. I love you. We belong together." "No." Vittorio spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "You don't get to decide that anymore. Clara has made her choice. You have 2 options now, Derek. You can accept these legal documents, walk away, and rebuild your life elsewhere. Or you can fight this, in which case Ms. Chen will pursue additional charges, and I will make certain that every legal resource at my disposal supports Clara's case. I can also make your life in this neighborhood very uncomfortable in ways that are entirely legal but extremely inconvenient. Your choice." Derek's face had gone pale. "You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining reality." Vittorio's expression was implacable. "Men like you, Derek, you operate on fear and control. But Clara isn't afraid anymore, and she's no longer alone. So I'll ask you once, will you walk away peacefully, or do we need to escalate this?" The silence stretched. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of everyone's attention focused on this moment. Derek stood at the center of the diner, suddenly looking smaller somehow, diminished. His shoulders slumped slightly. "I gave you everything," he said, looking directly at Clara with something approaching genuine hurt. "I loved you more than I've ever loved anyone." "That wasn't love," Clara said softly. "Love doesn't hurt like that." Derek stood there a moment longer, then bent and picked up the envelope from where Patricia had set it on a nearby table. He held it loosely, as if it might burn him. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes," Clara replied. "It is." Derek walked toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. He turned back one final time. "You'll regret this. When you're alone again, when your rich protector gets bored of his charity project, you'll regret pushing me away." "If she regrets anything," Maria spoke up from behind the counter, her voice sharp, "it'll be wasting 8 months of her life on someone who didn't deserve a single day of it. Now get out of my diner and don't come back." Derek's jaw clenched, but he pushed through the door without another word. They all watched as he got into his car, sat there for a long moment, then drove away, his taillights disappearing into the Brooklyn night. Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the nearest stool, her entire body shaking with the adrenaline crash. Maria was there immediately, wrapping her in a fierce hug. Patricia squeezed her shoulder, and Vittorio crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes. "You did it," he said quietly. "You stood up for yourself. You took your power back. I feel like I'm going to be sick." "That's normal. You've been running on adrenaline for 30 minutes. He stood, speaking to Marco. "Make sure he actually left the neighborhood. Follow at a distance, but make it obvious. I want him to know we're watching." Marco nodded and slipped out the back entrance. Patricia began packing up her materials. "Clara, that went as well as we could have hoped. He accepted service of the restraining order. That's on record now. And his statements about the accident and his justifications for his behavior will support the assault charges if he tries to fight them in court. Will he fight them? Most likely he'll take a plea deal. Men like Derek usually do when they realize the evidence is against them and their victim has strong legal representation." Patricia handed Clara her card. "Call me if he violates the restraining order in any way. Any contact, any sighting near your home or work, anything. We document everything from this point forward." After Patricia left, the four of them sat in the quiet diner: Clara, Maria, Vittorio, and his remaining associate. Maria made more coffee. Nobody spoke for a while, letting the tension slowly drain from the room. "I can't believe that's over," Clara said finally. "Just like that." "It's not completely over," Vittorio cautioned. "Derek will need time to accept this new reality. There might be some testing of boundaries. But you've established clear legal consequences, and he knows I'm watching. Most likely he'll eventually move on to someone else." His expression darkened. "Unfortunately. Should we warn whoever that someone might be?" "Already handled. Patricia will be flagging his information with the Domestic Violence Prevention Network. If he starts dating someone new and that person reaches out for resources, they'll have information about his history." Clara looked at this man who'd inserted himself into her life just days ago. This complicated, dangerous man who'd somehow become her unlikely savior. "Why are you really doing all this?" "I told you about Gianna." "No, I mean, really. There's something more." Vittorio was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "When Gianna died, I realized I'd spent 5 years trying to protect her from a threat I couldn't fight. I had all this power, all these resources, all these connections, and none of it could save her from cancer. I felt helpless in a way I'd never experienced." He looked up, meeting Clara's eyes. "When I saw your bruise, when I realized what was happening to you, it was something I could actually do something about, a fight I could win. Maybe that's selfish. Maybe I'm helping you to feel less powerless myself. But it doesn't change the fact that you deserved help, and I could provide it." "That's not selfish," Maria said gently. "That's human." They sat together for another hour, talking about next steps. Clara would stay at her apartment. Vittorio's people would continue watching the building. She'd return to work tomorrow, back to her normal routine. Patricia would handle the legal proceedings, and life would slowly return to something resembling normal. When it was finally time to leave, Vittorio walked Clara to the car. The Brooklyn night was cool and clear, stars barely visible through the city's light pollution. "Thank you," Clara said, "for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't need to repay me. Just live your life. Be free. Be happy. That's enough. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What happens now? Between us? When this is really over and I don't need protection anymore?" Vittorio smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "I suppose we'll figure that out together, if you want to." "I think I do. Want to, I mean." "Good, because I've grown fond of the coffee at Rosie's Diner. I suspect I'll be spending a lot of time there." He drove her home, walked her to her door, and waited until she was safely inside before leaving. Clara stood at her window, watching his taillights disappear, feeling lighter than she had in months. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "So proud of you, honey. Sleep well. You earned it." And one from Vittorio. "Marco will be outside until morning, but I don't think you'll need him. You're stronger than you ever knew. Good night, Clara." She smiled, set her phone down, and looked around her small apartment. It was the same space she'd lived in for months, but it felt different now. It felt like hers, like a home instead of a prison. Clara changed into pajamas, washed her face, and climbed into bed. For the first time in 8 months, she fell asleep without fear. Outside, the city hummed with its endless life, and somewhere in Brooklyn, a woman who'd been broken was beginning to heal, protected not by walls or locks, but by her own rediscovered strength and the unexpected support of others who believed she deserved better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Clara was free, and that was everything.